Hi and welcome to this week's Reporters. Today we're taking a closer look at a flourishing trade in Syria, the selling off of a priceless cultural heritage. The civil war may have had an incalculable impact on millions of lives, but it's also fueled a growing black market for the antiques trade. For millennia, Syria has stood at a crossroads of the history of humanity as ancient empires and classical civilizations have come and gone. So as the Islamic State organization publicizes its destruction of some of Iraq and Syria's most valuable artifacts elsewhere in the war-racked region, little by little, thousands of years' worth of historical items are disappearing, despite the best efforts of a small band of antiques detectives. Chris Huby and Hedi Awejd report.
Syria, a country ravaged by 4 years of war, an economy in ruins, and 3 million of its people displaced. Those who have stayed often find themselves without work and in poverty. To survive, many have begun to dig in search of ancient antiquities. One of our Syrian journalists has been to meet one of these treasure hunters, whose work is just the starting point of a huge international trafficking network. We're meeting 25-year-old Omar close to the northern town of Azaz. Before the war, he worked as a carpenter.
I don't work anymore. The factories all closed down 4 years ago.
In his hand, Omar holds a copper stick. It's with this simple tool that he's able to find his treasure. Just like a magician's wand, he can feel vibrations in his hand when he's close to metal objects.
There are machines nowadays to find ancient relics, but we use the copper rods. It's an old technique.
A technique passed down from generation to generation. For centuries, Syrians have found treasure whilst digging in their fields: coins, statues, mosaics and ceramics. For Omar, though, it's hard to know how much his finds are worth and who would be interested in buying them. But in the underground economy of today's Syria, anything is possible.
Look, for example, this piece that I found. I took a picture of it and I sent it by email to a Turkish expert. He will take a look and check its authenticity. I will then cross the border to deliver it to him.
A few days later, Omar gets a reply from his Turkish contact who's interested in purchasing the oil lamp. But Omar will have to take it to Turkey himself, which means a tricky border crossing. Every day, hundreds of Syrians try and do the same. To blend into the crowd, Omar joins a group of Syrian families, hoping he won't be searched. The archaeological finds he sells are usually quite small. Today, he's managed to stash them in his backpack. This is the border point, a ditch through a hole in the barbed wire. And now, the group are in Turkey. But just a few moments later, they're stopped by Turkish soldiers. Apparently it's routine and the Syrian refugees don't seem worried. They say there are hardly ever any searchers.
Everybody stand up.
And soon it becomes apparent why. It is in fact this man who has organized everything.
It's me who invited them.
This Turkish official works at the checkpoint. He demands money before letting them pass.
It's 2,500 Syrian pounds, or $13 per person.
Once they've paid, the refugees can continue their journey. Each passenger can choose his or her destination.
You're going to kill us? Come aboard.
It's through border points like this one that thousands of archaeological finds begin their journey across the globe. Our investigation takes us deep into Turkey to Gaziantep, some 100 kilometers from the Syrian border. Out of the 1,300,000 people who live in this town, a quarter are Syrian refugees. To survive, many are involved in the trafficking of antiquities, a trade which is well established here. We meet with Hussein, a trafficker who set up his network long before war broke out. A few days ago, he was in Syria, but despite the war, he crossed the border without any problems. Today, he's in Turkey to finalize some sales. What did the most expensive piece you found sell for?
About $75,000.
And what was that?
A gold coin.
From what period?
Roman times.
Syria was one of the most important satellites of the Roman Empire, and through the centuries, it's been part of many civilizations. And how many coins have you unearthed?
Lots. But the one I'm talking about is rare. There were about 65 coins in total, but one was really rare. The rest varied in price from $4,000 to $5,000.
From this one sale, he made $290,000. But the coins will be sold on for much more, almost 10 times the price on Western markets.
Let me explain. Each piece found is sold from trafficker to trafficker. The chain continues until the objects find themselves in the hands of a collector who buys them.
And for amateur enthusiasts of antiquities, it's easy to find what's available on the Syrian market thanks to the internet. Take this Facebook page, for example, called The Sale and Purchase of Antiquities, Paintings, Coins and Statues. There's an ad on here which reads, "Serious buyers only. Very beautiful mosaic for sale in the Turkish town of Antakya. Please send private message, no public posts." But in this business, not everyone earns the same money.
Those people who dig and search the earth find things without really knowing their history, how much they are worth, or their archaeological value. Those who do know are the buyers, who offer a price ranging from $50 to $100 per object. But they then sell them for $100,000, $200,000, even $1 million.
In Turkey, there are Syrian refugees who traffic and others who spend their days fighting to stop it. Ziad Abbas has a doctorate in philosophy. Originally from Damascus, he's taken refuge in Antakya. Today, he works for the UN's cultural agency UNESCO and Interpol. His job is to collect information about these trafficking networks.
It's a huge catastrophe. These rare objects are the ones most often pillaged. For example, you have things of great value, like an Aramean statue in bronze and gold. It was stolen and taken to Beirut, and now we don't know what became of it. Nobody knows where it is.
Thanks to word of mouth, his inquiries lead him to the Syrian refugee community. The trade in antiquities allows many to live, but there are also many crooks who profit from the war to make themselves richer.
So the relics cross into Turkey.
High-ranking Syrians from the opposition bring them here through their networks, and then they're sent on to Italy and places like that.
It's a real mafia.
Of course it's a mafia.
Among the Syrian refugees, many accuse the regime of their president, Bashar al-Assad, for profiting from this pillaging. Mohammed is 22. Before the war, he was a student. He's now in charge of communication for one of the numerous revolutionary rebel groups. He regularly travels between Syria and Turkey. He has seen many ordinary Syrians stealing in order to survive. But he's also discovered that Assad's troops are stealing from museums. A week ago, the town of Idlib changed hands. Can you tell us what happened at the museum there?
Yes, of course. As part of my work, I sometimes accompany rebels to the front. On this occasion, I was in the area where the museum is located. When we entered the building, there was nothing left. The regime had taken everything. They have emptied many important buildings in this way, like museums, banks, places like that. They have taken everything with them. The regime is well aware that these objects are estimated to be worth billions of dollars. So when they emptied the museum in Idlib, they knew exactly what they were doing.
According to different witnesses, everyone is involved in pillaging Syria's rich heritage to make money, be it the rebels, the soldiers of the Assad regime, or the fighters of the Islamic State organization. These pictures shocked the entire world. Members of the Islamic State group destroying priceless objects at the museum in Mosul in Iraq. But despite appearances, the jihadist group are not only interested in smashing everything, they're also involved in the trafficking of antiquities. And ever since the militants began threatening to destroy them, their value has rocketed. That's certainly what Hussein believes, the trafficker we met earlier. According to him, the Islamic State organization pulls all the strings.
Before the Islamic State group came to this region, things were a lot calmer. People could work as they wanted to. Today, though, there are restrictions. They say, if you want to work in this business, we take a percentage. Everything you find has to come under our control. You can't work without a permit written by them. You need that to be able to work. The Islamic State group are directly involved in the trafficking. For every object found, they have people who come and buy. They are in collaboration with the dealers who sell abroad.
Hussein's version of events is backed up by Jihad, who works for UNESCO and Interpol.
Today, the Islamic State group and other militias are the people who take the most profits from the trafficking of antiquities.
22-year-old activist Mohammed is all too aware that a part of Syria's heritage and identity has already disappeared.
Our country is well known as a land of ancient relics. For us to see such objects is totally normal. However, when I pass in front of them, I often ask myself what must have happened all those centuries ago. The antiquities, the treasures, they are all remarkable.
Whatever the outcome of the war, one thing is certain. The Syria of tomorrow has already lost a part of its past.
Now, for more background on this story, we're joined in the studio by Hedi Wajd, who worked on that report. Thank you very much for coming in today. And now, the heritage of Syria, as we've seen in that report, is really vital to the Syrian people. This is demonstration, once again, of the violence of the conflict and the impact that the conflict is having on the Syrian people by and large.
Yes, the particularity of Syria, because it's been a crossroad of history, is that people were living in the heritage. In Europe, if you want to see a piece of heritage, you've got to go in the museum. As in Syria, they were living in it. For example, the old city of Aleppo, which was one of the UNESCO heritage sites, the biggest city covered in the world, it has been destroyed. It's not only the heritage has been destroyed, it's the homes of dozens of people who has been destroyed as well.
Okay. We saw in the report there that Facebook pages demonstrate just how well organized this trade is. Were you surprised at the scale of what's going on?
No, I'm not surprised by the scale of what's going on, because the antique trade is one of the biggest smuggling in the world. Around between 6 billion to 15 billion US dollars a year on antique smuggling. So we're not surprised by the scale of it, specifically with the heritage that is in Syria.
Okay. What about the collectors themselves, perhaps further up the chain, if you will? This is a rich opportunity for the unscrupulous collectors around the world. What's being done to prevent the artifacts from reaching the market and reaching these unscrupulous collectors?
Well, all the organizations like UNESCO, Interpol, and the International Committee of Museums have edited lists of looted or missing artifacts. Some have been recovered. But it's very difficult, because the smugglers are keeping the most valuable pieces before putting them back in the market. For example, we found, but that's in Iraq, we found in Peru some pieces had been looted in the museum in Baghdad in 2003, more than 10 years after. So imagine for Syria, it would take a very long time before we can recover some of the most famous artifacts.
Okay. You mentioned there some of the successes that have been made. Is it a losing battle, though? Are the smugglers always going to win?
The smugglers are always going to win, yes, unless the international community is buying back those expensive or valuable artifacts. Otherwise, yes, it's going to be a very difficult battle to win.
Okay, speaking of the battle to win, of course, some artifacts and some articles are seized by the various authorities. What happens to them? Can they be realistically returned to Syria in the current state of affairs?
Of course, they won't be returned in current state of affairs, but for instance, in Turkey, some artifacts have been seized at the border. They've been stored in the museum in the border with Syria, and the Turkish authorities are saying that they will give it back to the Syrian people once the war is over. It's the same thing as the Louvre in Paris. They had some artifacts before the war, but this is, of course, when the war is over, which is not tomorrow.
Okay, and of course, finishing on the war itself, given the destruction wrought by the Islamic State, is it not perhaps safer for the artifacts, for them to remain out of the country? This is an old argument, of course, but specifically now, given the conflict in Syria, is it not safer now outside of the country?
They're, of course, safer outside of the country. You have some different initiatives can be taken an example, like for Afghanistan, the Swiss had an exile museum for the antiques for Afghanistan, and then they've been returned to the country. Perhaps something can be imagined for Syria.
Okay. Hedi Ouaged, thank you very much for that insight into your report. That was France 24's reporters. Do stay tuned. More news and headlines coming up.